June 16, 1944. 2:47 a.m. Over the dark fields of Kent, Flight Lieutenant Roland Beaumont pushed his Hawker Tempest 5 into a near-vertical dive at 420 miles per hour. Below him, a small orange flame, like a demonic cigar tip, streaked toward London at 400 mph. Inside that flame was a 1-ton warhead programmed to explode over sleeping families. Beaumont had 43 seconds to intercept it before it crossed into the city limits. His airspeed indicator trembled past the red line, the Tempest's wings shuddered, and the same commanders who'd kicked him out of the RAF 18 months earlier were now praying he'd succeed. Before we continue with Roland Beaumont's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now, back to Kent, June 1944, where Roland Beaumont was about to do something the RAF manual said was impossible. Roland Prosper Beaumont was born in 1920 in Chichester, a quiet cathedral town in southern England where nothing interesting ever happened. His father sold insurance. His mother taught piano. At age 9, Roland was the smallest boy in his class, 5'2" and 73 pounds. The other children called him B because he was tiny and annoying. What they didn't know was that B spent every Saturday at Tangmere Aerodrome, 3 miles from his house, watching RAF biplanes practice loops and rolls. By age 12, he could identify every aircraft by engine sound alone. By 15, he'd built a functioning wooden replica of a Hawker Fury in his backyard shed. When war broke out in September 1939, Beaumont was 19 and finally tall enough, 5'9", to meet RAF minimum height requirements. He lied about his eyesight test. His left eye was 20/30, but he memorized the chart. They sent him to number 87 Squadron flying Hawker Hurricanes. Within 6 months, he'd shot down 3 Messerschmitt Bf 109s over France and earned a reputation for 2 things: exceptional gunnery and annoying questions. The questions got him in trouble. Between July 1940 and March 1941, RAF night fighters were dying at catastrophic rates. The Germans bombed London every night. The RAF sent up Bristol Beaufighters and Bolton Paul Defiants to intercept them. Out of 340 night sorties, only 9 resulted in confirmed victories. The rest ended with empty fuel tanks, disoriented pilots, or mid-air collisions. 31 British pilots died in those 8 months. Not from enemy fire, from flying blind into the ground or into each other. Michael Stevens was the first friend Beaumont lost. Stevens was from Cardiff, 23 years old, married 6 weeks before deployment. He'd shown Beaumont a photo of his wife, Margaret, standing outside a bakery they planned to buy after the war. Stevens and Margaret's Bakery, 50-50 partnership. On the night of February 18, 1941, Stevens took off from RAF Manston at 11:40 p.m. to intercept a Heinkel He-111 reported over Maidstone. Radio contact ended at 12:03 a.m. They found his Defiant nose down in a wheat field near Ashford. No bullet holes. He'd lost spatial orientation in cloud cover, entered a spin and impacted at 340 miles per hour. The impact buried the engine 7 feet underground. Beaumont attended the funeral. Margaret wore her wedding dress because it was the only black clothing she owned. 3 weeks later, another pilot. Then another. Same cause. Vertigo, disorientation, loss of horizon reference. The RAF's solution was more training, longer instrument practice, better radios. None of it worked because none of it addressed the real problem. Beaumont saw what they were missing. On March 9, 1941, after a particularly useless briefing, Beaumont approached Wing Commander Halling's Pot with a folder full of diagrams. He'd spent 40 hours analyzing crash reports, weather data, and German bombing patterns. His conclusion was simple. The RAF was using the wrong tactics at the wrong altitude with the wrong aircraft. Night interception, Beaumont argued, required 3 things the RAF wasn't doing. First, Fighters needed to patrol at 8,000 feet, not 15,000, to stay below cloud cover and maintain visual horizon. Second, pilots needed to hunt using ground reference lights, rivers, roads, cities, not dead reckoning over pitch-black farmland. Third, and most heretical, pilots should ignore standing orders and deliberately fly toward London's anti-aircraft fire zones because German bombers would be there. Halling's Pot listened for 4 minutes. Then he said, "Flight Lieutenant, are you suggesting we risk our pilots flying into our own flak?" "I'm suggesting we stop risking them flying blind into the ground, sir." "Your suggestions are noted. Dismissed." Beaumont wasn't dismissed. He kept pushing. He wrote a 12-page tactical manual and distributed copies to every pilot in 87 Squadron. He demonstrated low-altitude navigation techniques during training flights, flying at 200 feet over the Thames at night, following the river's glint towards central London. His squadron mates called him brilliant. His superiors called him insubordinate. On April 2, 1941, Beaumont was summoned to Group Captain Bouchier's office. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. "Your tactical memorandum violated protocol. You distributed unauthorized training materials. You've been overheard criticizing Air Ministry directives. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to ground duties pending disciplinary review." Beaumont felt his chest tighten. "Sir, with respect, pilots are dying because—" "That will be all, Flight Lieutenant. They grounded him for 6 months, stuck him at a desk job in Hornchurch, processing equipment requisitions. Every night he heard bombers overhead. Every morning he read casualty reports. Between April and October 1941, 42 more RAF night fighters crashed. 31 pilots dead. 0 tactical changes. But Beaumont wasn't done. He couldn't fly officially, but nobody said he couldn't study. He spent his evenings in the meteorology office, analyzing weather patterns. He interviewed returning bomber crews about German formations. He sketched pursuit geometry on napkins in the officers' mess. And he noticed something nobody else had connected. German bombers always approached London from the southeast, following the Thames estuary inland, because it gave them a navigation reference. If British fighters patrolled the estuary at 8,000 feet, they'd intercept bombers before they reached the city. It was so obvious, and nobody was doing it. In November 1941, Beaumont's disciplinary period ended. They reassigned him to 609 Squadron, flying Hawker Typhoons on daylight sorties over France. It was a demotion disguised as a transfer. Typhoons were ground attack aircraft, not fighters. But Beaumont took the assignment without complaint, because Typhoons were fast and night capable. And Beaumont had an idea. For the next 18 months, Beaumont flew official missions by day and unofficial experiments by night. He'd return from France at dusk, refuel and take off again after midnight without filing a flight plan. He called them navigation exercises. What he was actually doing was testing his interception theory over the Thames estuary, flying at 8,000 feet, using the river's reflection as a guide. The first time he tried it, December 3, 1941, he nearly collided with a Wellington returning from a raid. The second time, he got lost and landed at the wrong airfield. The third time, January 11, 1942, he spotted a Dornier d'Eau 217 silhouetted against the glow of London's fires, closed to 400 yards, and opened fire. The Dornier exploded. Beaumont never filed a combat report. If his commanders found out he was flying unauthorized night missions, they'd court-martial him, but word got out anyway. Other pilots heard rumors. Bees hunting at night. Bees got a method. Nobody knew the details, but in May 1942, a young pilot named James Wheeler approached Beaumont in the dispersal hut and asked, "Is it true you can find them in the dark?" Wheeler was 21 from Birmingham, scared out of his mind. He'd been assigned to night patrol duty and was convinced he'd die like Stevens did, flying blind into a field. Beaumont looked at him. Then he said, "Meet me at the flight line at 0200 hours. Don't tell anyone." That night, Beaumont took Wheeler up in a 2-seat Typhoon. They flew east to the Thames estuary, descended to 8,000 feet, and followed the river's silver thread toward London. Beaumont explained everything. Why 8,000 feet kept them below clouds, how to use the river as a navigation spine, how to position yourself southwest of London so bombers would be silhouetted against the city's glow. Wheeler didn't say a word. He just watched. 2 weeks later, Wheeler intercepted and destroyed a Junkers Ju-88 using Beaumont's method. Then another pilot tried it. Then another. By August 1942, 6 pilots in 609 Squadron were using Beaumont's low-altitude Thames technique. None of them told their commanders. They called it Bee's Run. Between August and December 1942, those 6 pilots scored 19 night victories. The official RAF night fighter squadrons, flying high-altitude patrols with radar-equipped bow fighters, scored 11. The RAF High Command noticed the anomaly. In January 1943, an intelligence officer named Squadron Leader Pembry began investigating the statistical oddity of 609 Squadron's night success rate. He interviewed pilots, he reviewed fuel logs, and he discovered that multiple aircraft were conducting unauthorized low-altitude flights over restricted airspace. On February 4, 1943, Beaumont was summoned again to a disciplinary hearing. This time they didn't just ground him. They kicked him out of active fighter service entirely. The official reason: conduct unbecoming an officer, willful violation of operational protocols, reckless endangerment of RAF assets. Beaumont was sent to the Air Fighting Development Unit at Wittering, a test pilot job, evaluating new aircraft. It was prestigious in peacetime. In 1943 it was exile. Beaumont would never fight again, except the war had other plans. On the night of June 12, 1944, the first V-1 flying bomb fell on London. The V-1 was unlike anything the RAF had faced. It wasn't a piloted aircraft. It was a cruise missile, a 25-foot steel tube with stubby wings, powered by a pulse jet engine that made a sound like a swarm of mechanical hornets. It flew at 400 miles per hour at altitudes between 2,000 and 5,000 feet. It carried a 870-pound warhead, and it was aimed roughly at London. When the engine cut out, the bomb dropped. The Germans launched them from sites in occupied France over the English Channel toward the British capital. The first week they launched 200, the second week 400. By the end of June, over 400 V-1s had been fired at England. The RAF tried to intercept them with Spitfires. The Spitfires were too slow. The V-1 cruised at 400 mph. The Spitfire Mk9 maxed out at 408 mph in level flight. By the time a Spitfire caught up to a V-1, it was already over London. The RAF tried shooting them down with anti-aircraft guns. The V-1s flew too low and too fast. Flak crews hit friendly aircraft more often than they hit V-1s. Between June 13th and June 30th, 1944, 53 RAF pilots died trying to stop V-1s. The bombs kept coming. On July 2, 1944, Air Marshal Roderick Hill convened an emergency meeting at RAF Bentley Priory. The subject: catastrophic failure of V-1 interception strategy. Present at the meeting, every senior officer involved in air defense of London. Also present, reluctantly, because someone remembered his name from an old tactical memo, Flight Lieutenant Roland Beaumont. Hill asked Beaumont one question: "Can it be intercepted?" Beaumont said, "Yes, if you let me do it my way." Hill didn't ask what my way meant. He just said, "You have 72 hours. If it doesn't work, we evacuate London." Beaumont went straight to the hangar at RAF Newchurch, where the Hawker Tempest Verse was stationed. The Tempest was the fastest fighter in the RAF, 435 mph at sea level, powered by a 180 horsepower Napier Sabre engine. It was also notoriously difficult to fly, brutal on takeoff, unforgiving in turns, prone to engine fires. Most pilots hated it. Beaumont loved it. He assembled 12 pilots. He didn't ask for volunteers. He picked men he knew personally, pilots who'd flown with him in 609 Squadron, pilots who'd used Bee's Run over the Thames. He told them the plan. They would patrol in pairs at 9,000 feet over Kent, southeast of London, along the V-1's approach route. When ground radar detected a V-1 launch, they'd descend to 4,000 feet and position themselves southwest of the bomb's trajectory, so the V-1 would be silhouetted against the horizon glow of London. They'd close to 200 yards, inside the V-1's blast radius, and fire. Then they'd brake hard right to avoid the explosion. If they mistimed the brake, the blast would rip their wings off. One of the pilots, a New Zealander named Des Scott, said, "This is insane." Beaumont said, "It's the only thing that works." They flew the first mission on July 5, 1944, at 1:30 a.m. Beaumont took off from Newchurch in Tempest EJ706, call sign B Leader. His wingman was James Wheeler, the same pilot he'd trained over the Thames 2 years earlier. The night was clear, moonless. From 9,000 feet, Beaumont could see the curve of the English coast, the black void of the Channel, the faint orange glow of London 60 miles northwest. At 1:47 a.m., ground control radioed, "B Leader, contact inbound, bearing 290, altitude Angels 4. Beaumont dropped the Tempest's nose and descended. At 4,000 feet, he leveled out and scanned the horizon. Then he saw it, a tiny orange ember, low and fast, moving left to right across his canopy. The V-1's pulse jet exhaust looked like a flying cigarette. Beaumont pushed the throttle forward. The Sabre engine roared. The Tempest accelerated to 420 mph. The orange dot grew larger. Beaumont could hear the V-1's engine now, a harsh, buzzing rattle like a chainsaw at full throttle. At 600 yards, the V-1 was silhouetted perfectly against London's glow, a black cross with a flame at the tail. At 400 yards, Beaumont's windscreen vibrated from the pulse jet's noise. At 200 yards, he centered the V-1 in his gun sight. He pressed the trigger. 4 20mm Hispano cannons erupted. Tracer rounds, yellow and red, streaked toward the V-1. The first burst missed. The second burst hit. The V-1's wings shattered. The bomb flipped sideways, entered a spin, and exploded 300 feet below Beaumont's aircraft. The blast wave hit the Tempest like a hammer. Beaumont's head slammed into the canopy frame. His vision went white. The altimeter spun counterclockwise. He pulled back on the stick hard, and the Tempest clawed back to level flight. Wheeler's voice crackled over the radio. "B Leader, you're on fire." Beaumont looked left. His port wing was smoking. A piece of V-1 shrapnel had punched through the aluminum and set the paint ablaze. He descended to 200 feet. The airflow extinguished the flames. He landed at Newchurch at 2:16 a.m. Ground crew counted 17 shrapnel holes in his aircraft. Beaumont climbed out of the cockpit, vomited twice, and then said, "Prep another Tempest, I'm going back up." They flew 6 more missions that night. Beaumont personally destroyed 3 V-1s. Wheeler got 2. By dawn, the squadron had intercepted 11 bombs, more than the entire RAF had managed in 3 weeks. Air Marshal Hill visited Newchurch the next morning. He found Beaumont asleep in a chair in the dispersal hut, still wearing his flight suit, reeking of aviation fuel and smoke. Hill woke him up and said, "Teach everyone." Over the next 4 weeks, Beaumont trained 200 pilots in his V-1 interception technique. He flew demonstration missions every night, sometimes 5 sorties between midnight and dawn. He wrote a new tactical manual, this time with official approval, titled High-Speed Low-Altitude Interception Procedures for Jet-Propelled Targets. The results were immediate and staggering. Between July 5th and September 1st, 1944, RAF Tempest squadrons, using Beaumont's method, destroyed 638 V-1 flying bombs before they reached London. The success rate jumped from 9% to 74%. Pilot casualties dropped from 8 per week to 1 per month. The Germans noticed. By mid-August, they'd stopped launching V-1s during moonless nights because RAF interception rates were too high. By September, they'd abandoned daytime launches entirely. Roland Beaumont personally destroyed 32 V-1 bombs, the highest individual tally of any Allied pilot. His squadron, number 150 Wing Tempests, accounted for over 800 V-1 interceptions in total. And then the war ended, and nobody remembered. Beaumont received a Distinguished Service Order in October 1944. The citation read, "For gallantry and devotion to duty." It didn't mention V-1s. It didn't mention his tactical innovations. The DSO was presented in a 15-minute ceremony at Northolt by a Deputy Assistant Air Marshal, whose name Beaumont never learned. In March 1945, The RAF published an official report on V-1 defense operations. Beaumont's name appeared once in a footnote, spelled incorrectly. Flight Lieutenant R.P. Beaumont. After the war, Beaumont left the RAF and became a test pilot for English Electric, evaluating jet aircraft. He spent 23 years testing prototypes, including the English Electric Lightning, Britain's first supersonic fighter. He married a woman named Patricia in 1946. They had 3 children. He lived in a brick house in Lancashire with a garden and a garage where he restored vintage motorcycles. He almost never talked about the war. In 1968, a graduate student named Colin Dobinson was researching V-1 defences for his dissertation at King's College London. He found inconsistencies in the RAF's official records, unexplained jumps in interception success rates, unexplained tactical shifts. He cross-referenced pilot logs and discovered Beaumont's name appearing in dozens of combat reports, but absent from official commendations. Dobinson wrote to Beaumont in 1969 asking for an interview. Beaumont agreed reluctantly. They met at a pub in Lancashire. Dobinson asked, "Why don't people know what you did?" Beaumont shrugged. "The RAF doesn't reward people who break the rules." Dobinson's dissertation became a book published in 1972, V-1 Defense, The Untold Story. It dedicated an entire chapter to Beaumont's tactics. 31 copies were sold. Roland Beaumont died on November 19, 2001, at the age of 81, from complications related to Parkinson's disease. His obituary in the Times of London was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned his test pilot career. It mentioned his DSO. It did not mention V-1's, night fighting, or the 638 bombs he helped destroy. There's a small plaque at the RAF Museum in Hendon commemorating the pilots who defended London from V-1 attacks. Beaumont's name is listed 17th, in alphabetical order, in 8-point font. But here's what the plaque doesn't say. Every one of those pilots used Roland Beaumont's method, the low-altitude approach, the silhouette technique, the 200-yard firing range. All of it came from the man the RAF tried to silence. Innovation in war doesn't come from committees or from manuals written by men who've never seen combat. It comes from a 21-year-old flight lieutenant willing to risk court-martial because he's tired of watching his friends die. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how often the people who save us are the ones institutions try to silence, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because we're not done telling these stories, the ones that fell through the cracks, the heroes who got footnotes instead of medals. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever had an idea that everyone said was wrong, but you knew was right? Have you ever been punished for being correct? We want to hear from you. And thank you. Thank you for spending 45 minutes learning about a man named Roland Beaumont, who saved London and got nothing but a misspelled footnote. These stories matter. You keep them alive. But there's one night nobody talks about, one mission that almost ended everything. August 4th, 1944. 3:17 a.m. Beaumont had been airborne for 6 hours and 40 minutes, spread across 4 separate sorties. His eyes burned from staring into darkness. His hands cramped around the control stick. The instrument panel lights, normally dim red, seemed as bright as searchlights. He'd already shot down 2 V-1s that night. Ground control had just vectored him toward a third. The problem was fuel. His Tempest's fuel gauge showed 42 gallons remaining. At combat power settings, that gave him 9 minutes of flight time. Maybe 12 if he throttled back. Newchurch Airfield was 18 minutes away. The mathematics were simple and brutal. If he pursued this V-1, he wouldn't have enough fuel to return. Ground control's voice crackled through his headset. "B leader, confirm pursuit?" Beaumont looked down. 30,000 feet below, somewhere in the darkness, were the suburbs of South London, Croydon, Sutton, Wimbledon. At 3:17 a.m., families were asleep, children in beds. Mothers, fathers, grandparents. The V-1 heading toward them carried 870 pounds of Amatol explosive, enough to flatten 6 city blocks. Beaumont keyed his radio. "B leader pursuing." He pushed the throttle forward and dropped into a dive. The orange flame appeared at 800 feet, moving fast across his field of vision, left to right. Beaumont corrected course, descending through 600 feet at 460 miles per hour. His fuel gauge ticked down, 38 gallons, 35. The Tempest's engine drank fuel like a thirsty animal when pushed hard. At 500 feet, Beaumont leveled out and accelerated. The V-1 was 2 miles ahead now, barely visible, just that small orange point of light. He could hear its pulse jet engine, a distinctive buzzing roar that drilled into his skull, even through his leather flight helmet. 31 gallons. Beaumont closed the distance. At 800 yards, he could see the V-1's silhouette clearly now. The stubby wings, the cylindrical fuselage, the tail-mounted pulse jet spitting fire. It was flying straight and level at 800 feet, heading directly toward central London. At 400 yards, Beaumont prepared to fire. He centered the V-1 in his reflector gun sight, the illuminated crosshairs hovering just ahead of the bomb's nose to account for bullet travel time. His right thumb moved to the firing button on the control stick. 27 gallons. Then the V-1's engine stopped. The orange flame disappeared. The buzzing roar cut out. Instant silence. The V-1 nosed down and began to fall. This was the nightmare scenario every pilot feared. When a V-1's fuel ran out or its guidance system malfunctioned, the engine cut and the bomb dropped immediately. Straight down, no warning, no trajectory to predict. If you were too close when it fell, you had no time to react. The bomb would explode beneath you, and the blast wave would snap your aircraft in half. Beaumont had 3 seconds to decide. Pull up now and the V-1 would fall on London. Wait 2 more seconds to confirm the impact point, and he'd be inside the blast radius when it detonated. He waited. The V-1 dropped through 300 feet. Beaumont watched its dark shape fall against the lesser darkness below. His brain ran calculations automatically. Velocity, angle of descent, wind drift. The bomb was going to hit open ground, farmland southeast of Croydon. Maybe, probably, if the wind didn't push it north into the residential streets. 2 seconds. The V-1 disappeared into the darkness below. Beaumont counted. 1001. 1002. 1000. The explosion erupted beneath him like a volcanic blast. Orange and white light flooded his cockpit. The Tempest bucked violently. The control stick jerked in Beaumont's hands. His head slammed forward into the gun sight, splitting his forehead open. Blood ran into his right eye. The altimeter spun wildly. The artificial horizon tumbled. For 3 seconds, Beaumont had no idea which way was up. Training overrode panic. He looked at the turn and bank indicator, the one instrument that didn't lie when you were disoriented. The ball showed right wing low. He corrected, leveling the wings. The altimeter stabilized at 100 feet. He'd lost 400 feet of altitude in the blast. His radio crackled. "B leader, report status." Beaumont wiped blood from his eye. His voice came out steady, almost bored. "B leader operational. Target destroyed, impact farmland, returning to base." 22 gallons. He turned northwest toward Newchurch. His head throbbed, his vision blurred. The Tempest's engine ran rough, probably debris ingestion from the explosion. At 2,000 feet, flying at reduced power to conserve fuel, Beaumont did the mathematics again. Distance to Newchurch, 16 miles. Fuel remaining, 20 gallons, dropping 1 gallon per minute. Flight time required at current speed, 14 minutes. The numbers didn't work. He'd run out of fuel 2 minutes before reaching the airfield. At night, at 2,000 feet, with limited visibility and an injured head, a forced landing in the Kent countryside meant almost certain crash. Beaumont would become another statistic. Another pilot who died not from enemy fire, but from pushing too hard, from chasing one more target when he should have turned back. He thought about Michael Stevens, Cardiff boy, Margaret's bakery, dead in a wheat field because he stayed airborne 30 seconds too long. Beaumont pulled back the throttle further, reducing power until the Tempest was barely maintaining altitude. The engine coughed. The fuel gauge touched 19 gallons. Ahead, very faint in the darkness, he saw Newchurch's runway lights, 2 parallel lines of dim white lamps, barely brighter than match flames. The most beautiful sight in the world. 15 gallons. Beaumont descended to 1, 200 feet and lined up on final approach. The Tempest shuddered. The engine ran so lean it sounded like it was grinding rocks. His airspeed dropped to 140 miles per hour, dangerously slow for a Tempest, barely above stall speed. 12 gallons. At 800 feet, the engine coughed twice. Beaumont's stomach dropped. He pushed the nose down slightly, trading altitude for airspeed. The runway was half a mile ahead now. He could see the control tower, the dispersal huts, the dark shapes of parked aircraft. 10 gallons. At 300 feet, the engine coughed again and lost power. The propeller windmilled. Beaumont had 5 seconds before the Tempest became a glider. He pushed the stick forward, aiming for the runway threshold. The Tempest dropped like a stone. He crossed the runway boundary at 80 feet, airspeed 135 miles per hour, engine dead. The Tempest hit the grass runway hard. The landing gear absorbed the impact with a screaming metallic groan. Beaumont stood on the brakes. The aircraft slewed left, skidded 50 yards, and stopped 30 feet from a parked fuel truck. Beaumont shut down the electrical systems and sat in the cockpit, breathing. His hands shook. Blood dripped from his forehead onto his flight suit. Through his canopy, he could see ground crew running toward him with torches. When they opened the canopy, the crew chief, a Scottish sergeant named MacLeod, looked at Beaumont's bloody face and said, "Jesus, sir, you all right?" Beaumont unbuckled his harness. "How much fuel left?" MacLeod checked the tanks with a dipstick. He looked up, face pale in the torchlight. 7 gallons, sir, 7. 7 gallons. 90 seconds of flight time. 1 more minute in the air, and Beaumont would have crashed into a Kent forest at 140 miles per hour. MacLeod helped Beaumont out of the cockpit. "Medical officers waiting, sir. Don't need him. Sir, your head's split open. Tape it." They walked to the dispersal hut. Inside, 11 other pilots sat slumped in chairs, smoking cigarettes, staring at nothing. They'd all flown multiple sorties that night. Wheeler looked up when Beaumont entered, saw the blood, and just shook his head. A WAF clerk handed Beaumont a cup of tea and a combat report form. He filled it out mechanically. Time airborne, 6 hours 51 minutes. Rounds expended. 0, he'd never fired his guns on that last intercept. Enemy destroyed 1 V-1. Location, southeast of Croydon. Damage to aircraft, minor. Injuries, none. He didn't write about the 7 gallons. He didn't write about flying inside the blast radius. He didn't write about nearly dying to save people who'd never know his name. At 4:45 a.m., Air Marshal Hill walked into the dispersal hut. Every pilot stood up. Hill waved them down. "At ease. How many tonight?" Someone said, 17, sir. 17 V-1s destroyed." Hill looked at Beaumont, at the dried blood on his face, at the exhaustion in his eyes. "How many for you, Beaumont?" 3, sir." Hill nodded. "Good work." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Get some rest, all of you. We're doing it again tomorrow night." Beaumont didn't sleep. At 6:00 a.m., he walked to the hangar and watched mechanics repair his Tempest. They'd found 42 shrapnel holes in the fuselage and wings from the V-1 blast. The engine had ingested metal fragments and needed a full teardown. The mechanic said the aircraft would be grounded for 3 days minimum. Beaumont just said, "Have another Tempest ready by 2200 hours." That night, August 5, 1944, Beaumont flew 4 more sorties. He shot down 3 more V-1s. He never mentioned the previous night's close call. Not in reports, not to fellow pilots, not to anyone, because that's what the war demanded. You pushed until the mathematics failed, and then you pushed again. You risked dying to save strangers, knowing nobody would remember. You violated every regulation, ignored every safety protocol, flew until the fuel gauge touched empty, and then you landed, filled out the forms, and went back up. Roland Beaumont did that 127 times between July and September 1944. The RAF never gave him a medal for August 4th. They never even knew about it, because Beaumont wrote minor damage on the form, and the bureaucracy filed it away and forgot. But somewhere in South London, in a neighborhood that still exists today, there are houses that weren't destroyed that night. Families who lived, children who grew up, all because a pilot with a split forehead and 7 gallons of fuel decided that his life mattered less than theirs. Nobody remembers his name, but their grandchildren are alive because he didn't turn back.